The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Chapter 1. When the good folk of Sleepy Hollow got together around the fire on dark and windy nights, their talk often turned to a mysterious being who had been seen riding along nearby roads. "He was a Hessian cavalryman who lost his head in the Revolutionary War," one said. "A cannonball took it clean off." "A ghost, the commander of all the evil spirits in these parts," another claimed. Nobody knew for sure, but many a farmer, out late at night, would see this apparition go swooping past, an enormous, terrible figure mounted on a powerful stallion. He was the Headless Horseman. "His body's buried in the churchyard," said one man, who claimed to be an expert on the subject. "At night, he likes to ride out on the battlefield where he was killed to look for his missing head. Toward dawn, you'll see him go tearing through the hollow as fast as he can ride. He has to get back to his grave before daybreak." One of those who listened most closely to these ghostly tales was Ichabod Crane. Ichabod was the town's schoolmaster, and a man who thought he knew a thing or two about ghosts himself. Ichabod, indeed, looked something like a crane. He was a tall, lanky young man, with long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, and feet like shovels. His small head was perched on a skinny neck. He had huge ears and a long, pointed nose that made his head seem like a weather vane pointing the direction of the wind. Many said he looked like a scarecrow from some cornfield. Now, Sleepy Hollow is one of the most peaceful spots in the world. It's a hidden valley along the Hudson River that's just as quiet and drowsy and dreamy as it can possibly be. Some say a German doctor, practiced in witchcraft, put a spell on the hollow many years ago. Others claim that it was the scene of the powwows of an Indian sorcerer even before Henry Hudson sailed up the river that bears his name. "This is a haunted spot," an old farmer whispered to Ichabod one night. "The sky is full of meteors and shooting stars, and there's nightmares that'll slip into your dreams." During the day, Ichabod didn't have time to think of ghosts and spirits. He was busy running his little one-room schoolhouse. If you went by on a warm, drowsy day, you might hear the murmuring voices of his pupils reciting their lessons. Or you might hear the stinging whack of the birch rod as the schoolmaster laid into some misbehaving student. But Ichabod didn't like having to punish his charges. If the child was weak and cried just to look at the switch, the teacher let him off with a warning. When he had to beat a tough young lad for mischief, Ichabod assured the boy that the lashing was for his own good. Ichabod liked his pupils. When school was out, he would even become the companion and playmate of the older boys, and he would sometimes walk the younger ones home, especially if they had a pretty older sister, or if their mother happened to be a good cook. He always tried hard to keep on good terms with the families of his pupils. He had no choice. His salary was very small, and his appetite was very large. "What's for dinner?" were often the first words out of Ichabod's mouth. Though skinny, he could swallow a huge meal the way an anaconda snake does. As part of his pay, he would room and take his meals with the farmers whose children went to his school. He lived with each family for a week, then moved on. Over the year, he made the rounds of the neighborhood, all his belongings tied up in a big cotton handkerchief. Farmers in those days sometimes thought that schooling cost too much, or that schoolmasters were just lazy drones. To make the burden lighter, and to make himself useful, Ichabod would help his hosts with their chores wherever he could. He helped the farmers to make hay. He lent a hand when they mended their fences, took horses to water, drove cows to pasture, and cut wood for the winter fire. "Let me take care of the little lambs," he would say to the mothers, and he would sit for hours with one child on his knee, at the same time using his foot to rock another in its cradle. One of Ichabod's great pleasures was to pass long winter evenings sitting by the fire with the farmers' wives as they told tales of ghosts and goblins. They would talk while they spun wool and roasted apples in the fireplace. "That field down yonder is haunted," someone would say. "There's a goblin that lives under that bridge," another would claim. "I've seen him with my own eyes." Ichabod had his own tales to tell. He had read books on witchcraft that could relate stories of omens and the odd sights a person could see in the night. He would tell of the dangers of comets and shooting stars. Sometimes he would scare those ignorant people by telling them the world actually turned around and that without knowing it, they spent half their time upside down. It was pleasant telling these tales while sitting snug in a chimney corner. The room would glow with the heat of the crackling wood fire, and, of course, no ghost dared to stick his head inside. But walking home afterwards was another story. Then all the terrors of the fables took form around the timid schoolmaster. Fearful shapes and shadows loomed along his path in the snowy evening. Seeing the light of a distant window, he wished he were back, safe inside. "Oh, keep away from me!" he would exclaim. But it was only a bush covered with snow, not a ghost. "What was that?" he whispered, but it was merely the sound of his own feet breaking through the snow. It got so that he dreaded even to look over his shoulder, in case someone was following him. But there was one spirit that Ichabod Crane feared more than any other. It was the one the old farmers' wives called the Galloping Hessian of the Hollow. Sometimes, very late at night, walking through some dark, shadowy glen, Ichabod would suddenly hear a rushing blast come howling through the trees. "It's only the wind," he would tell himself, but he could never completely convince himself that it wasn't the Headless Horseman. Chapter 2. In addition to teaching school and helping out around the farms where he lodged, Ichabod Crane was the singing master of the neighborhood. He earned many bright coins by instructing young folks in the singing of hymns. On Sundays, he was very proud to take his place in front of everyone at church and lead his little group of chosen singers. "I think," he would confide to his friends afterward, "that our hymns this morning really outshone everything else about the service. Don't you agree?" Certainly you could hear his voice above everyone else's. It carried half a mile to the other side of the mill pond. And they say that, to this day, on a quiet Sunday morning, the faint notes of Ichabod Crane's high voice still echo in the air near the old church. An educated man, Ichabod was a gentleman with tastes and knowledge way beyond what the rough countrymen could brag of. He proved to be popular with all the girls and the women of that rural neighborhood. Whenever he came to visit, they were likely to set out extra cakes and candies, and to make use of their best silver teapots. Ichabod went out of his way to encourage the good opinion of the ladies. He would talk with them after church on Sundays. He would gather grapes for them from the wild vines that overran the surrounding trees. He would recite for them, or for their amusement, all the sayings carved into the gravestones in the churchyard. "Here lies my wife, and let her lie," he read. "She's at peace, and so am I." And all the ladies would giggle. He would go walking with a whole group of them down by the mill pond, while the bashful country bumpkins hung back. These young men were shy as sheep, and envied Ichabod's elegance and easy way with the girls. The ladies thought Ichabod a man of great learning. He read to them from A History of New England Witchcraft. Witches and magic were subjects that he believed in most firmly himself. Wise and educated as he was, Ichabod still loved weird and unusual tales. Living in Sleepy Hollow whetted his appetite for legends of ghosts. The more wild and strange the story, the more likely he would swallow it. Often, after school, he would lie in the clover near the gurgling brook and read for hours about witches and goblins and ghosts. It would already be growing dark by the time he headed for home. Every sound of nature spooked his excited mind. The cooing of a whippoorwill from the hillside, the croak of a tree toad, the hooting of an owl. Even the rustling of birds in a bush made Ichabod's hair stand on end. Fireflies scared him. A beetle might bump into him in the dark, and he would jump 10 feet, sure that he had been touched by a witch. The only way he could make it home was to sing his hymns, which he thought would drive away evil spirits, or at least drown out the noises they made. "There goes Ichabod Crane," a farmer in Sleepy Hollow would say to his wife as they sat by their house at night. "I hear that scrawny schoolteacher's voice again." But however many fears and frights came over Ichabod, they were merely the terrors of his own mind. Though he'd seen many specters in the darkness, and even been pursued by the devil in various shapes, daylight always put an end to those evils. His life was actually a safe and pleasant one. Until one day, his path was crossed by a being who has caused more trouble for mortal man than all the ghosts, goblins, and witches put together. A woman. End of the chapter. Chapter 3. "Miss Van Tassel," Ichabod Crane said one evening, "your voice was just marvelous tonight. You are certainly making great progress." Ichabod had just finished giving his little group of singers their weekly music lesson. Katrina Van Tassel, the young lady he spoke to, looked at him through her eyelashes. "Thank you, Master Crane," she said. "You are too kind." She threw him a very sweet smile, which he quickly returned. "Please give my best wishes to your mother and father," Ichabod said, as she started for home. "I will," answered the girl. "I'm sure they would be happy to have you visit sometime soon." The schoolmaster's Adam's apple moved up and down. He blushed with happiness. He kept staring down the long road after Katrina had disappeared, imagining her in his mind's eye. "Katrina," he sighed to himself. Katrina Van Tassel was the only child of one of the most prosperous Dutch farmers of those parts. She was plump as a partridge, and as soft and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's luscious peaches. She was famous for her beauty, and just as famous for her family's riches, which she would someday inherit. Of course, not everyone saw her through rose-colored glasses the way Ichabod did. "That little snip," one farmer's wife said of her. "Why, she's a flirt, and she's stuck on herself. Just look at the way she dresses." It was true that Katrina liked to dress up in the bright gold jewelry that her great-grandmother had brought her from Europe. Her skirt was shockingly short for those days, all the better to show off the prettiest foot and ankle in the neighborhood. Ichabod had a soft spot for all women, so it's not surprising that he fell for such a pretty girl as Katrina, especially when he found out how rich her family was. "Welcome, schoolmaster," boomed old Baltus Van Tassel, when Ichabod paid the family a visit. "Katrina has spoken very highly of you." Katrina's father welcomed Ichabod with a hearty slap on the back. She has," Ichabod stammered. Why, of course, she's by far my most talented singing student. Her voice is just like a nightingale's. I declare it is." "Oh, she's full of stories about you," Van Tassel said. "She says you're the smartest man she's ever met." "Why, I don't know about that." Very pleased with himself, Ichabod looked down at his big feet. As soon as he had the chance, he also looked all around the Van Tassel farm, which stood in a fine spot on the banks of the Hudson River. The barn was as big as a church, full to overflowing with grain and hay. Rows of plump pigeons cooed from its roof. Sleek, fat hogs were lounging comfortably in their pens, or strolling out now and then to sniff the air. A flock of snow-white geese, along with a squad of ducks, drifted lazily in the pond. Several big turkeys went gobbling around the farmyard, as if they owned it. And to top it off, a magnificent rooster strutted across the yard. He flapped his wings and crowed with pride and happiness. Then he scratched in the earth to find some grubs for his family of hens and chicks. "What a fine farm you have," Ichabod told Katrina's father. "I can't help admiring all your animals. They're so handsome, so well fed." In fact, Ichabod's mouth was watering. Everywhere he looked, he saw not animals, but food. Ham and bacon, beef and sausages. When he looked at the pond, he saw geese in their gravy and ducks swimming in an onion sauce. Seeing at the pigs, he imagined them roasting with apples in their mouths. He thought about turkeys stuffed and browned from the oven. He could even see the rooster plucked and cooked, lying on its back and ready to be carved. "You've a good eye for livestock," said the proud Baltus Van Tassel. "Come in the house. My wife has been dying to meet you." Everything about the house told Ichabod of the family's wealth. Outside were harnesses and nets for taking loads of fish from the river. Huge bags of wool stood ready to be spun into yarn. Inside, the walls were strung with colorful Indian corn and strings of dried apples and peaches and red peppers. This is our best parlor," said Mrs. Van Tassel, proud to show off her home to the schoolmaster. The polished wooden table shone like a mirror. In the corner, she opened a cupboard so that Ichabod could admire their treasure of old silver. When he'd concluded his very pleasant visit, Ichabod headed home on foot, determined that some day these rich fields, these orchards loaded with fruit, would be his. "Who knows?" he said to himself. "I may even sell everything and invest the money in an enormous piece of land out west. They say that's where fortunes are to be made these days." Yes, he could see it already. He and the lovely Katrina headed out on a loaded wagon for Tennessee or Kentucky or Lord knows where. He even imagined that they already had a family of children who would go with him. But It was one thing to imagine himself courting the rich and beautiful girl, and quite another thing to win her heart. End of the chapter. Chapter 4. Ichabod had heard of the knights of the olden days, who went out to defend their ladies. They had to fight giants and dragons, and do battle with sorcerers. Then they had to climb stone walls and break through iron gates into the dungeons where the poor damsels were being held prisoner. My task is just as difficult, the schoolmaster said to himself. I must try to win the heart of the beautiful Katrina, and she's such a fickle girl, forever changing her mind. I never know if she's serious or only toying with me. And that wasn't all. Like the knights of old, Ichabod had foes. Not dragons or giants, but flesh-and-blood rivals. There were many young farm boys who thought they were the ones who should marry the fair Katrina. They were jealous of each other, and especially jealous of an outsider like Ichabod Crane. Ichabod knew that they would gang up on him if he tried to woo the girl he loved. I'm always ready for a fight, cried the most frightening of all these rivals. His name was Abraham Van Brunt, but his friends shortened that to Brom. And because he was so strong, so powerfully built, everyone called him Brom Bones. Cool. Brom was known throughout the country as a hardy young man with dark, curly hair and a handsome face. He was bold and liked his fun. You should see him ride a horse, Ichabod's friends whispered to him. When he says something, that's it. Nobody dares to question him. Brom Bones was a rough man, but not a bad-tempered one. He and his friends loved to have fun and would go around the countryside looking for good times. He would wear a fur cap with a foxtail hanging down. Aye, there goes Brom Bones and his gang, an old lady would say, when the whoops and cries of the band of ruffians woke her in the night. When someone played a prank, or a fight broke out, everyone knew Brom Bones was likely to be at the bottom of it. This rogue had already picked out the girl for him, and it was none other than the lovely Katrina Van Tassel. He didn't know much about getting a girl to like him. He was gruff as a bear when he approached her, but she seemed to like him anyway, at least sometimes. None of the other rivals for the love of Katrina dared to approach her when Brom Bones came to call at her house. If they saw his horse tied out front, they rode on by. His reputation as a brawler was too fierce. Ichabod recognized that it would be foolish for him to challenge Brom directly, but he took advantage of his position as Katrina's singing teacher. It gave him a perfect excuse for paying attention to her and visiting her at home. Katrina's parents were glad to have the schoolmaster come by. They indulged their only daughter and paid little attention when Ichabod and Katrina went out walking around the farm in the evening. We can't know what it was the two talked about as they walked, but we can be certain that Ichabod used all his learning and charm to try and win the fickle Katrina, and he surely thought he was making some progress. In fact, he might have imagined that his dream of marrying her and inheriting the Van Tassel riches was about to come true. The neighbors noticed that Brom Bones's horse was not seen very often tied to the fence outside the Van Tassel home anymore. Ichabod Crane had better watch out, they said. Bones is not a man to cross. Everyone knew that Brom Bones and Ichabod Crane would have to face each other sooner or later. Brom wanted to settle the matter like the knights in armor did, by fighting Ichabod face to face. I'll double the schoolmaster up, he said, and lay him on a shelf in his own schoolhouse. Well, Ichabod wasn't about to give him the chance to do anything like that. He never let Brom rattle him. He never rose to the challenge of his cruder and stronger rival. Brom Bones tried to provoke the schoolmaster by playing practical jokes on him. Brom and his friends would come storming past Ichabod's peaceful schoolhouse on their horses. They stopped up the chimney and made the building fill up with smoke during singing lessons. They broke into the school at night and turned everything upside down. Ichabod wondered if a group of witches might have had a meeting there. Always, Brom looked for a chance to embarrass Ichabod when Katrina was around. Once, he took a mangy old dog and taught him to whine and howl in a very funny way. He sent this dog to sit outside during singing lessons and howl when he heard Ichabod's voice. The summer passed, and still the two rivals never fought it out. Now, it was a fine autumn afternoon. Ichabod sat at his desk in the school. In the drawers were all those forbidden things he'd taken from his pupils: half-eaten apples, pop guns, and many, many paper-tossing balls. His students were hard at work. Ichabod had given one of them a taste of the birch rod not long before, so they were on their best behavior. The schoolroom was peaceful. But the quiet was soon broken by the arrival of a man riding a wild, half-broken colt. He came clattering up to the school like some important messenger. "Master Crane," he announced, "you are invited to a party. It is hoped that you will grace the house with the honor of your honorable presence. Most honorable, sir." "A party?" Ichabod said. "But where?" "A party, a merrymaking, a festive event," said the man, full of his own importance. Yes, but who invites me?" the schoolmaster asked again. "Why, the Honorable Master Van Tassel," the messenger announced, "this very evening, at his honorable home. What will I tell him?" "I'll be there," Ichabod shouted. "I will most certainly be there." End of the chapter. Chapter 5. "All right, children," said the schoolmaster. "That'll be all for today. You can go home now. Run along." The boys looked at each other in amazement. The teacher never let them out early. He was more likely to make them stay late at school until they finished some boring lesson. But not today. Today it was rush, rush, rush. He didn't even make them put their books away, and when they knocked over benches in their eagerness to leave, he didn't say a word. In a flash, they were out of the school and running across the village green, shouting with joy and ready to have fun. The gallant Ichabod was brushing and tidying up his best suit. Actually, it was his only suit. He spent half an hour in front of a broken mirror that hung in the schoolhouse, slicking his hair and trying to look stylish. Because he imagined himself a knight in shining armor, he decided that he must arrive at the Van Tassel party in style. "I need to borrow a horse," he told the farmer he was staying with, "and, of course, a saddle." That ornery old Dutchman, Hans van Ripple, looked at him through narrow eyes. "I guess you could take Gunpowder," Van Ripper said, "but you'll have to ride him with a firm hand. He's full of mischief, that horse. He has the devil in him." Ichabod assured the farmer that he was a skillful rider, though, in truth, he'd only been on a horse a few times in his life. And so, sitting on his majestic mount, he rode out in quest of adventure. "Let's go, Gunpowder," the schoolmaster said. The horse gave him a dirty look before he began to clomp slowly down the road. Gunpowder was a broken-down workhorse. He had the neck of a goat and a head like a hammer. His tail was all matted with burrs, and he was blind in one eye. But no matter how old and worn out he looked, he was a horse full of mischief. "Onward, noble steed," Ichabod said to encourage the animal. They made a good pair. Ichabod rode with short stirrups, so that his knees were up to the top of the saddle. His sharp elbows stuck out like grasshoppers. He carried his whip upright like a lance. As the horse jogged along, Ichabod's arms flapped like a pair of wings. The sight the horse and the rider made as they shambled out of Van Ripper's gate was an odd one indeed. It was a beautiful autumn evening. Frost had nipped the trees, turning their leaves to brilliant orange and purple and red. Wild ducks streamed past high in the sky, heading south. Squirrels scampered around gathering beech and hickory nuts for winter. As usual, Ichabod's thoughts turned to food. "What a lovely crop of apples this year," he said to himself. "Look at that great heap waiting for the cider press. Those pumpkins would make some tasty pies." Passing by some beehives, he couldn't help but think of a stack of steaming pancakes and Katrina's dimpled little hand pouring honey over them. It was quite a journey to the Van Tassel farm, all the way to the other side of Sleepy Hollow. Along the way, Ichabod could see the peaceful waters of the Hudson reflecting distant mountains. By the time he approached the farm, the sun was setting in the west, turning the sky pink and gold. "Why, what a crowd," Ichabod observed to his host. "Everyone in the region seems to be here tonight." "Of course," said the jolly Master Van Tassel. "The more the merrier, we say. Have a good time, schoolmaster. Later, we'll have dancing." Ichabod looked around at the leather-faced farmers, with their homemade coats and huge shoes. Their wives wore plain country outfits that were very old-fashioned. The young ladies might put on a fancy ribbon or straw hat they'd bought in the city, and the lads tied their hair back in short ponytails, which was the fashion of the time. "Here comes Brom Bones," someone shouted. Many of the party looked out to see him come thundering up on his magnificent horse, Daredevil. This was a horse, hardly even broken, who galloped with such wildness that he often came close to throwing his rider. Just the kind of animal Brom liked. Ichabod didn't pay much attention to the entrance of his rival. He'd spied something that interested him more. And I don't mean all the pretty girls who were there that night. No, Ichabod had seen the food. Platters were heaped with cakes that only Dutch housewives know how to bake. There were donuts and sweet cakes and shortbread. "Help yourself, Master Crane," Katrina's mother said as she laid out more goodies. "I don't know where to begin," Ichabod told her, though he'd already begun to make a good beginning. "It all looks so good. Shall I have apple pie, or peach pie, or pumpkin pie?" He decided a slice of each would be the best choice. He went on, piling his plate with ham and beef, with roast chicken and boiled fish, and heaps of preserved peaches, plums, and pears. In fact, there wasn't a dish on the table that Ichabod didn't try. "Delicious," he said, and took another mouthful. Nothing made him happier than eating. As he chewed, he rolled his eyes and chuckled to himself. One day, he thought, this will all be mine. I'll snap my fingers in the face of Hans Van Ripper and all those stingy farmers. I'll be master of this house. No more school teaching then. "Eat up," said old Baltus Van Tassel. "It's time for the dancing." The fiddler was a gray-haired old man who'd been playing music in that region for 50 years. He ran his bow across his battered violin, nodding his head in time to the music. He stomped his foot every time a new couple were to start. "May I have this dance?" Ichabod said to the lovely Katrina. He held his breath, waiting for her answer. "Certainly," she said. Ichabod's heart leapt with joy. Ichabod prided himself on his dancing as much as his singing. When he danced, his arms and legs shook, his head and hips rolled, every part of him moved to the music. His lanky body clattered around the room as if he were having a fit. Tonight he was in bliss to be dancing with his sweetheart. He rolled his eyes at her, and she answered with smiles and winks. All this time, Brom Bones, jealous as he could be, sat in the corner by himself. He brooded and frowned as he watched the dancers. The more Ichabod and Katrina whirled around the room, the more angry Brom Bones became. End of the chapter. Chapter 6. When the dance was over, Ichabod joined Baltus Van Tassel and some of the older folks, who were sitting out on the porch talking about the Revolutionary War, which in those days was not long over. There had been fighting between the British and Americans near Sleepy Hollow. Everyone had a favorite story about what had happened to them. "I almost captured a British warship all by myself," one old Dutchman said. "I would have, except my gun jammed." "I blocked a musket ball with my sword," said another. When the others laughed, he offered to show them the dent in his sword as proof. When each one had had a chance to tell what a hero he'd been in the war, the talk turned to ghosts. For these people who lived near Sleepy Hollow, everyone knew what strange and frightening things happened in that hidden spot. "Have you ever seen the woman in white?" the one old man asked. "She haunts the hollow near Raven Rock. You'll hear her shriek on winter nights when a bad snow is coming. She died in an icy snowstorm years ago." "The Headless Horseman's been out and about lately," said another man, puffing on his pipe. "I've seen him." "As have I," another added. "He was riding past the old church on the hill." "Did you hear," said Master Van Tassel, "what happened to old Brouwer?" His friends said that they had not. "He never believed in spirits and such. But one night, when he was riding down that road by the glen, where the trees grow so thick over the road that it's dark even during the day, the horseman chased him over hill and dale until they reached the bridge that crosses the stream down there. At that point, the horseman turned into a skeleton and flew over the trees with a clap of thunder. Old Brouwer tumbled headfirst into the stream." The men nodded at this new tale, a lesson to those who don't believe. "I met that silly Headless Horseman once," a voice said. They all looked. It was Brom Bones. "I was riding home one night when I saw him," he continued. "I offered to race him, betting I could beat him. And I would have. Daredevil can beat any horse, dead or alive. But just as we reached that bridge, the horseman pulled up and vanished in a flash of fire." Ichabod was impressed by these stories. He added some of his own, telling what he had seen on his nightly walks through Sleepy Hollow. Soon, the time came for the party to break up. Farmers gathered up their families in their wagons and set out for home. You could hear them rattling through the quiet night as they went. Some of the girls went off with their boyfriends. Their laughter sounded fainter and fainter until it gradually died away. The house grew quiet. Ichabod was the last to leave. He lingered to talk with Katrina, certain that he had won her heart. We'll never know what she said to him, but she must have given him bad news, for he soon came out of the house looking as sad as any man ever looked. Had the fickle Katrina been playing with him all along? Had she used him just to make Brom Bones jealous? Heaven only knows. But her answer was written on Ichabod's gloomy face. He trudged out to the barn to fetch his horse, who was sound asleep. It was very late at night when Ichabod started on his somber journey home. The countryside, which had seemed so cheerful earlier, was now dark and dismal. The night was so still that he could hear a watchdog barking from all the way across the river. Now, all the stories of ghosts and goblins that he'd been hearing came back to him. "My goodness, it sure is dark out tonight," he said to himself. Just then, clouds moved in to cover the stars, and it grew darker still. He was approaching the darkest, loneliest part of Sleepy Hollow. A man had been hanged from the big tree that stood beside the road. They said his ghost lingered there. As Ichabod drew closer, he began to whistle, and someone whistled back. No, it was only the wind through some branches. For a moment he thought he saw something white in the tree, but it proved to be a place where the wood had been split by lightning. But suddenly he heard a groan. His teeth chattered in fright, but it was just two limbs of the tree rubbing against each other. Ichabod passed by, and nothing happened. But up ahead, the road was even darker and spookier. He had to cross a little stream that everyone said was haunted. Nobody liked to cross that stream after dark. As Ichabod approached it, his heart began to thump in his chest. "Come on, Gunpowder," he said. "Let's hurry up." He gave the horse a few kicks in his ribs to make him move faster, but the horse would never do what his rider wanted. First, he banged into a fence sideways. Then he plunged across the road into a bramble bush. When he came to the stream, the stubborn horse stopped dead. Ichabod nearly went flying right over the animal's head. As he righted himself in the saddle, the schoolmaster heard a sound. He peered into the darkness. Deep in the shadow of a grove, he was able to make out a black and towering shape. He couldn't see what it was, but he imagined it to be a gigantic monster, ready to spring on him. End of the chapter. Chapter 7. Ichabod's hair stood up on his head in terror. It was too late to turn and run. What should he do? Who are you?" he stammered. The being did not reply. "Who's there?" Ichabod repeated. No answer. Ichabod nudged the stubborn Gunpowder into motion. He closed his eyes and began to sing one of his hymns. A loud noise made him look around. The creature had moved out to the middle of the road. Even in the stark darkness, Ichabod could see that it was a rider, an enormous figure on a powerful black horse, and he was following along behind the schoolmaster as he went. "Giddy up, Gunpowder," Ichabod said. "Let's go." He hurried on, hoping to leave the strange horseman behind, but the other kept pace with him. Next, Ichabod tried slowing down to let the dark figure pass him by, but the stranger slowed too. Ichabod tried to sing his hymn again, but his mouth was so dry that he couldn't get a note out. What he hated most was the silence of the creature. It made not a sound, but rode along, mysterious and menacing. They both went over a small hill. Now, viewing his fellow traveler against the background of the sky, Ichabod was horrified to see that the horseman had no head. Even worse, he was carrying the head that should have been on his shoulders, in the crook of his arm. Now Ichabod gave Gunpowder some fierce kicks to get him going. They galloped down the road as fast as the horse could run, but the spectre came chasing right behind. Both of them were riding like the wind, throwing up stones and sparks as they went. In his mad rush to get away, Ichabod paid little attention to where he was going. Now he discovered that Gunpowder had taken the road that led to the bridge so famous in all the ghost stories. It was the one just down the hill from the lonely churchyard, where the Headless Horseman was said to be buried. Gunpowder was running in a mad panic, and they actually managed to gain some distance on the awful pursuer. But just then, Ichabod felt the girth come loose on his saddle. He tried to hold on to the strap, but the saddle slipped and then fell off. The phantom horseman behind them trampled it into the dust. "Oh no, Hans Van Ripper will be furious when he finds I've lost his good saddle," Ichabod gasped. But he quickly realized that he had more terrible problems to worry about. One of them was trying to stay on Gunpowder's back. First, he slipped to one side, then to the other. Sometimes he was jolted so hard on the horse's backbone he thought he'd break in two. But what was that up ahead? He saw starlight shimmering on a brook. He saw a church on a hill, and he saw a bridge. It was the same bridge where the Headless Horseman always disappeared. "If I can just reach that bridge," thought Ichabod, "I am safe." At that moment, he heard the black steed panting close behind him. He imagined he could feel the horse's hot breath. "Go, Gunpowder, go!" he shouted. He gave the bony horse another kick. Old Gunpowder sprang onto the bridge. His hooves thundered over the planks. As he reached the opposite side, Ichabod looked behind to watch the horseman vanish in a flash of fire, just as he was supposed to. Just at the moment he saw the goblin rise up in his stirrups and hurl his head at him. Ichabod tried to dodge the horrible missile, but too late, it crashed into his skull. Ichabod tumbled into the dust. Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind. The next day, old Gunpowder was found without his saddle, munching grass by his master's gate. Ichabod did not appear for breakfast. Dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The children showed up at school, but not their schoolmaster. "What could have happened to Ichabod Crane?" wondered Hans Van Ripper. "And where is my saddle?" His neighbors helped him look. They found the saddle trampled in the dirt. They followed the tracks of horses' hooves leading to the bridge by the church. On the bank of the stream they found Ichabod's hat. Close beside it was a shattered pumpkin. They searched the brook, but did not find the schoolmaster's body. Ichabod left only a few possessions behind: some clothes, a rusty razor, and a few books. In the back of a book about dreams and fortune-telling were some sheets on which Ichabod had tried to write a poem to the fair Katrina. Hans Van Ripper burned these sheets, and Ichabod's books along with them. "I'll never send my children to school again," he swore. "No good comes from learning to read and write." At church on Sunday, everyone was talking of Ichabod Crane and his mysterious disappearance. Folks went down to the bridge to see where the cap and pumpkin were found. They talked over all the stories they'd heard. Finally, they decided that Ichabod had been carried off by the Headless Horseman. And with that, nobody troubled any more about the matter. They moved the school to another spot and hired a new schoolmaster. Years later, an old farmer claimed that Ichabod Crane was still alive. The schoolmaster had moved to a distant part of the country and kept a schoolhouse there. He had studied law and became a lawyer, had written for newspapers, and had even been elected judge. Brom Bones, who, soon after the disappearance, married the lovely Katrina, always seemed to know something about the matter. Whenever anyone mentioned the pumpkin, he would burst into laughter. But the old farmers' wives were the ones who knew best. They were certain that Ichabod had been taken away by some spirit. They often told the story around the fire on a winter's night. The deserted schoolhouse, they said, was haunted by the ghost of the poor teacher. A boy walking by there on a summer night would sometimes hear a distant voice singing a hymn, the sound drifting sadly through the quiet of Sleepy Hollow. End of the chapter. End of the book. Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I hope you enjoyed it, got a few chills and thrills out of the experience. And again, I want to take this time to say thank you. An extra thanks to my honorable mention supporters on Patreon: Jones, Kyle Stiegel, Lone Raven, Milady, and Noah Baumgardner. I really appreciate it, everyone, and hope you enjoyed the recording. Happy Halloween.